Welcome, Karen. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on, Tracy. It's an honor.
We are going to have a great conversation about grief. And how can we have a great conversation about grief? But I think educating people about the different things and how it presents, and not just the cycle and denial, anger, bargaining, blah, 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 right? There's that. But I would love it if you could start off by doing a introduction and tell the people in my audience today a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a thanatologist, which is a rare breed, I think. Not many people know what that is. So I have a degree in grief, which means that's what I studied. And so I went through my own high conflict divorce, and about 5 years ago, I decided to take this into the divorce world because I think grief is not talked about enough in divorce, especially when you're dealing with high conflict or any challenging time, actually. So it kind of was a passion of mine to try to make the world aware of how hard it is, not just legally, financially, but also emotionally, but also the grief wise. So that's kind of where my passion is.
Well, it's a cool passion. You don't know too many people that have a grief passion, but I mean, thank God you do, right? And people don't know a narcissist passion either, to help, but here we are.
Yeah.
Thank you for that introduction. You are also the author of this very cool workbook called Just Separated, and I love it. It's a great workbook. It gives people direction. Start here, do this. Everybody go find that. We'll put the notes in the show notes down below. Let's start with the normal grieving cycle, denial, anger, bargaining, stuff like that, just because people, that's all they're familiar with. But those that are maybe watching might not understand that. Let's start with that and we'll go into the different layers and things like that afterwards.
So in thantology, we actually don't talk about five stages of grief. We no, so we talk about more of a dual process model. So we actually look at things like loss orientated and restorative orientation. So it's like they bing bong across each other, right? And at the beginning of any type of loss, estrangement, death, divorce, whatever, we'll notice that more people are in loss orientation rather than restorative. And what we want is some ping pong back to the restorative and back to loss. So what you'll eventually see after we work through some of the grief is they start doing more loss orientation, or restorative orientation, sorry. So that's kind of what we look for, as well as I look for integration. So the stages of grief are very, very good for our brain because we like stages. We're like, okay, I'm in this stage, I'm in this stage, I'm in this stage, right? But really, what I look for, yeah, it's not linear, right, Tracy?
Uh-uh.
And it's also it's integrating. So if you can look at it as this is I don't know if any of you guys have heard of the jar theory. So if you picture three little jars, and the small jar is here, and the grief ball is this big right ball, and you can tell how much pain that is in because it's always so small and it's hitting the jar, the small jar. What I want for everybody is eventually the grief doesn't change. The ball goes in the medium-sized jar. So you understand where the metaphor is? And then we go to the other big jar. The grief stays the same, but the jar grows bigger. And
Mhm.
if you want, I can send you a picture of that to give to your people. But it's this thing that we all think that grief just ends. It doesn't, it gets integrated. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of how we as the anthology see it.
I love that. I love that. And so tell me more about these jars and blobs in them. Blobs of grief. That's how I picture
Yeah.
it.
So it's just it just is to help people understand that it's a journey,
Mhm.
that there's no quick fix to grief, right? So um I can talk about a bit about the layers of loss. So people automatically think it's just say we're going to pick divorce whatever. It's just here's a divorce, and that's what you're grieving about. But what we find is you're nearly not just grieving about that itself, you're grieving about so many other things.
Mhm.
And people can't always pinpoint that, right? So it's like, am I grieving the house? Am I grieving my social status? Am I grieving my health if you've been dealing with a high conflict, sometimes the health, right? So there's a lot of layers of loss. It's actually one of the exercises in the book that we have where it's like you have to kind of pinpoint where you're actually grieving. And that leads me into talking about, if you want to talk about, is intangible and tangible losses. because that's something that's also new to many people. So if you think about tangible or easy, right? They're the material things that you can feel. So
The
the
house.
house, yeah, the big one, right? The house, the finances, right?
Mhm.
The pension that's been split in half. Legal bills, it's also very like,
Mhm.
so that's really easy. A lot of people like they'll say, "Oh yeah, that they can understand that one a bit better." But the harder one that a lot of people don't understand is the intangible ones.
Mhm.
And so those are the ones that, you've probably talked about over the years. It's like that loss of self,
Mhm.
right? Which is a big one. Loss of identity. Who am I now?
Mhm.
Social status. I had a client that once we talked it over, it wasn't the house or anything. It was that she was married to someone quite big, and that it was like, who am I now? I'm not married to this person anymore, right? And I know it seems shallow, but it's not. It's just part of our identity. There's also loss of trust, right? Like when you have, when you've been married to someone who's high conflict, narcissistic, you chose that person or they chose you, but you marry them, and so then you think, am I going to find fall in love with that same type of person again? Because you lose a lot of self-trust in yourself. So those are some of the intangible losses, and tangible losses is
I,
that.
I would imagine if we add to that list, grieving, you're only going to see your kids half the time if you've got
Yeah.
kids, right? That's a huge wound for both sides, right? And then you've got the loss of if you did have to sell or move out of the house, the neighborhood, the familiarity, the neighbors, the people that were in your life that now might have gone to the other side. So those intangible ones are just wacky. They're everywhere.
It's everywhere, and I don't think they're often
Consider.
known,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
it's kind of like people don't even know are aware of what they're actually grieving.
And when they're in this stage, well, if there isn't the stages things, but if we're in those jars, is there something called the layers of loss? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so that is when we talked about that, we pile on, right? There's a lot of things that are, and I think again, as I go back, is we just aren't aware of these things. So the layers are
The
the
house,
ripple effect. Yes, it's
the
cumulative, right? So we know that divorce in general is a stress response, right? It is stressful. It's overwhelmed. We get flooded. Well, grief is also a stress response. And so I don't think many people know that, right? So already you're a divorce, your cortisol levels are crazy, you're flooded, right? Especially high conflict. And then not many people aware that actual grief is a stress response as well. It affects your brain and your body. There's been new research actually about the brain grieves as
Mhm.
well as the body grieves. And most people don't understand that. I don't know. I'm sure anyone listening, I'm sure they've had times where they've gotten sick in through the divorce process,
Mhm.
right? Because your immunity is just shot, right? Because you're just so overwhelmed.
Mhm.
So if you want, I can talk a bit about the symptoms, which is something that I think a lot of people, again, are not aware of all the symptoms of actually that grief can be.
Right. Again, I think people they know the word, they might know those five stages, but as you're saying, there's a lot more to it. So tell us some of the symptoms besides that they might get sick because of this is affecting them that way. What other kind of symptoms would people look for when they're going through a divorce or in an estrangement situation where is this grief? I get that a lot. Am I actually grieving? Why I'm grieving? I'm in the middle of hell. I didn't realize grief was attached to me.
Yeah, grief is attached to everything, really, in life. None of us will come out of this life without grief. And I don't think many of us understand it. We've not been taught well. Our society does not like grief. We kind of avoid it. So the symptoms, so one of the symptoms is body, right? Like you mentioned, right? So I had terrible digestion issues, right? That can be something that people get grieving. You can either, and then some people don't eat or they eat too much. You can get headaches, body aches, somatic, right? Like aches. And if you're dealing with high conflict, you're hypervigilant, right? That racing heart, that sweating can happen with body, muscle tension. So body grieves, right? And that's when we get bad, we can get immunity and we can get sick. So I tell everybody stay hydrated and take a multivitamin when you're under major stress because we are run down. Another one is cognitively, right? I don't know if you've had clients where they kind of seem forgetful or, you know, yeah, like so it's like for me too, when I was going through those hard times, I would forget things and I'd feel confused and difficulty concentrating. And that's because we're bottom heavy, which means our amygdala, we're in fear and flight mode. So that's something our cognitive brain isn't quite acting the normal. And with narcissists, we can kind of get that internal gaslighting ourselves, like, did that really happen? Oh, he wasn't that bad, or she wasn't that bad. And even when you've left, you can have that cognitively. Another one is social. So you can feel very lonely. You can struggle to connect with others. Also, we know social with divorce, right? There's a lot of shifting with in-laws or or maybe
Family.
you were friends with them, right? And they're not. And so we lose friends. And so socially, it's tough. And so with a narcissist type, you can, I don't know, for me, I had a bit of hard time trusting people again.
Mhm.
So socially, I was a bit withdrawn, right? Then there's behavioral, and behavioral is common too. A lot of grievers, they tend to isolate and they tend to avoid,
Mhm.
avoiding doing legal stuff, avoiding doing anything because they just are so shamed and so depressed and quiet. And so interesting with narcissist survivors, sometimes behaviorally we attract the same ones again because that's all we know, right? As you know, you're the expert. So, and then there's a common one, emotional, which is, we're angry, sad, relief, and it's all over the place. Narcissists, we tend to do the fawning, we do the people pleaser stuff. And then the last one is spiritual, right? And that's another one I don't know if I'm gonna people know about, but spiritually we can question our God. Like if you have strong faith,
Mhm.
we have a hard time making meaning again. And we can question why me? Like, why did you put me with this person? And what's my lesson here? And there's a lot of grievers actually in divorce and death loss that get really angry. They get really angry with God. So that's another thing. And so, and with narcissists, abuse survivors, they tend to have get kind of mad about the moral thing, like is justice going to be served? Why isn't justice going to be served? And
Mhm.
justice is, and we know justice is never really going to be served, but we question that. So it's a spiritual struggle there. So those are the six, and we are all over the place with them, right? Not one person fits all these. We are so unique. So I don't know if
That
that's
helps a
good,
lot.
good answer. Yeah.
Would someone shaking, like I've seen it where they're presenting with that physical symptom where they're so hypervigilant that there's like a physical reaction where they're not eating, they're not sleeping, but then comes what I've seen is the shaking. Is that part of this?
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
that's kind of a yeah, that's also sounds like a trauma response too. Like they're
Yeah.
so hyper vigilant
Yeah.
that they're like they
Yeah.
can't. And I want to mention that with the grief, we tend to see the trauma first, right? The hypervigilance, the window of tolerance and stuff. Then the grief shows up.
Mhm.
And that's when people are like, "Oh my goodness, like I left this person. Why am I grieving?" I'm sure you've heard that many, many times. And that goes back to what we talked about the intangible losses, right? Because you've lost so much of yourself in that relationship, right? So yeah, I don't that I hope that answers that question.
Totally. And again, I knew it was a trauma and I knew it was because she's not taking care of herself and all of that stuff. So once they're in this part of this where they're having these symptoms or having physical, mental, all the different things that are going to be cascading through their body, how do they come out of it? Like, is there it's different with a divorce. I mean, I know a lot of people, we've all lost someone who to death, right? That's a grieving cycle. To me, in many cases, that's easier. Not that it isn't hard, but there's a finality, right? When you're in divorce, there's so many uncertainties. So what do they do? Because it's hard to get out of it if you don't know the way out. Where will I survive? Those instincts that come. How will I support myself? Where will we live? How will I be able to do this? And all of those things that put fear in them have to be tied into this. So how does someone move forward through the grief?
So as I said, it's integration and grief can last a long time. So I
Mhm.
don't want anyone out listening going, okay, well, we're going to be done this in 2 years.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah, I don't know, I think research says 3 to 7 years maybe, but yeah, but I'm not, everybody's so unique. One of the things that I like to do is, and this is a tip for everybody, is to start doing a micro ritual. And rituals are really important in the grief world. We like rituals. So that's why we have funerals, right? That's why I have weddings, we have graduations. So if we can do micro ritual every day, it can really help you gain some autonomy, but also some awareness that this is what you're feeling is also grief.
Mm.
So it's a practice, one of them is you could light a candle and say an affirmation. You can go in front of the mirror and say, you know what? I am really strong today. Or whatever it is, you can even write an affirmation, like in your journal. Say a grief journal. Write one thing. I am grieving today, and go through the list of things that we've talked about and say, I am grieving not seeing my kids today. I am grieving my community. I really miss my best friend down the street, because it may not be about your ex, right?
Mhm.
It's going to be something else.
Mhm.
Another one I like is go grab a rock. I used to, when I did sessions in person, I would give them a nice rock and I would say, hold it. And I
Mhm.
want you to ground yourself in that and feel the weight of that grief
Mhm.
and say it out loud. This is what I'm grieving. We have to acknowledge the grief that comes with this.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we're just going to stay stuck. And avoiding is one of the biggest thing grievers do is we push it away. We push it away. And that's with also with estrangement too, Tracy. You need to acknowledge the loss, right? And it's one of the hardest losses, Tracy, this estrangement. It is when I was doing my degree, it came up, this ambiguous loss that you're talking about,
Mhm.
because there's this always this hope, right? There's always this hope, and most should have it, but it's still a lot to live with, right? And there is no finality. There's nothing. It's like just out there.
Yeah,
And yeah.
it's proof. I mean, for the clients that have it, that are in an estrangement situation, I don't want to say a percentage, but a lot of them don't even know what they've done. There's like
Mhm.
probably 40% have been given what I call the Santa list of all the things that they've done, and that they now have some understanding. But for the people that don't even understand why this is happening, I think the grief is harder. That's what I've seen. It's that uncertainty. Not that we need a Santa list of you did this and this and this is why, and we're not talking to you, because in the narc world it's all lies. But at the same time, when there's that, I've had people in my groups that have had a child die and a child estranged, and they said it was easier to heal from the death because that's all there is. We know the end is there. They're in heaven. Everything is all we can do, but now move through the grieving process. When you've got this either in and out or absolutely nothing with no reasoning, I think the parents struggle so much more because there is that no finality in that, right?
Well, ambiguous is uncertainty.
Mhm.
And it's such a like you are they're physically away from you, but psychologically always there.
Mhm.
So you're living with this constant, right? And
Yeah.
it's very, 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 very challenging too. Like I often think of another one like is people that have lost war people that they've never had the body. They don't know if they're actually alive or not. It's the same type of thing, right? Like
Right.
because you still hold hope and you don't know what happened. You don't like your questions like you're saying like a lot of these parents are going, I don't really know. And the hardest thing is if you knew, you could help. Like you could figure it out, but you don't even know. And that's so difficult. There's so much grief here.
Yeah. I mean, it's a mountain of grief, and to every situation, it's certainly different. But in the divorce world, I think it's underestimated the damage of the grieving cycle that you're in, because they may go, okay, well, I hated my ex and it's all good. But again, it's those other things that will hit you later. The traditions. We're filming this a week or two before Christmas. And so, you know, never having another Christmas with everyone there, and that might have been not just your children, but also you always had your in-laws, and then you always had your, nieces, nephews, and all that's gone. And they're all having dinner with your kids. I mean, that part hurts a lot. So people don't realize how big the grieving cycle is. And, there'll be those triggers because people can kind of feel like they're doing okay. And along comes the holidays and it all swarms back. Do you want to talk about the triggers that can bring it
Yeah.
back into the field?
Yeah, I just actually wrote a blog about this because it's anniversary reactions. So Christmas or holidays are very, very ritual. You know me and rituals, right? They're very, very ritual. So even if you are happy you left this crappy marriage or toxic marriage, you could be walking down the street and like a nice walk in the stores, and you can smell like shortbreads or something, and that triggers you to going, well, we used to make shortbreads, right? Or you're driving by and there's a beautiful lit house. Oh, we used to have a house like that and the lights. So lights and sounds and stuff. And it's not that you want that back, but your body remembers. It's neurological, right? So you have these anniversary reactions. And I just want to tell everybody it's normal, right? Don't think, okay, oh my gosh, I want that person back. He was, or she was terrible. It's just your body's response. It's very, very, very common. Death loss, all grievers. A lot of us have it, especially those first couple of years. These anniversary reactions. I've had people get anxious in October, starting to get worried about the holiday season in October, and it's 2 months away.
Mhm.
The holidays are very, very, we during the week, during the rest of the year, it's pretty routine, right? Even co-parenting, like, but we slow down in December, don't we? And we take time off. And what does that give us? Our nervous system and our heads, we're all like, oh, oh, I'm really missing this. Oh, I don't have this family anymore. Oh, right. I'm not distracted. I'm not working all the time. Or so I hope that explains that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Is there anything else you want to share that we didn't talk about? Like, what advice would you have for people going through this?
Oh, well, a couple things. Divorce grief is very disenfranchised.
Mhm.
Society doesn't care. Like they care, but they don't. I often say, like, people will say, well, you chose this, or you married this person, or you got out, right? So I often say, I give the example, you're at a holiday party and you left this toxic, abusive marriage. Your aunt says, well, what took you so long, honey? And your uncle says, well,
I never
he,
liked him.
yeah, I never liked them. And then your cousin says, well, that was a really nice house you gave up. So it's very subjective, right? So you can kind of not get feel like you can get supported very well. So one of the things is in my world with the grief world is like get that team,
Mhm.
but get that support. You really need support. And make sure this is really important. It's the right support systems. Be aware that grief is real.
Mhm.
It's a death of relationship. Make sure you get the right support systems. Every griever, divorce or death loss, I always ask about the support systems because if you have the right support systems,
Mhm.
not the bad ones, like I can talk about that for an hour, but the right support systems, you can get through this. It's an integration.
Mhm.
There's not an end date, it's an integration. So
Are there
that's
mistakes that people can make when they're grieving, besides not realizing that that's it?
yeah, that's a big one is not realizing, but also avoiding. We
Mm.
cannot avoid it. If you're going to avoid, it's going to show up,
Mhm.
especially with the parents you're dealing with estrangement. You have to acknowledge that this is a lot of grief. It'll show up either in sickness, it'll show up in irritability or anger, big one.
Mhm.
With divorce as well as estrangement, anger. Um, it can show up with, 5 years down the road. You need to be aware that you're grieving. You need to lean into it, I often say, and sometimes only lean in a little bit because that's all you can handle.
Mhm.
Lean into it. However you do. There's also different type of grieving, right? There's instrumental and intuitive. And not everybody's going to grieve the same way. I talked about that before, unique, right? Uniqueness of grief. So intuitively is what showing, right? Emotions, seeking out support. A lot of women tend to sway to more to the intuitive, right? But they're instrumental. Instrumental are ones that are doers. So they will do things. So I just want to be mindful of to everybody that if you're somebody in your family or friends aren't grieving like you, that's normal because we all sway between intuitive, emotional, like more emotional, seeking support, to instrumental, where we have to think things through.
Mhm. Wow, that was awesome. I can't wait to share this with my audience. Tell people how they can reach you.
So I'm at divorceworkshop.ca. I do one-on-one, a lot of times from referrals from people like you that
Mhm.
their person's just so heavy into grief, but they can reach out. I have offered a really generous consultation because I'm a thantologist. The grief stories aren't really 15 minutes long, right? So I do that, and I have a book, and I also have my own podcast, which you're coming out next year. So it's called Just Separated. So
Well, thank you so much, Karen. I think that this is going to help so many people. And everyone, if you are listening to this today and it has like affected you or you learned a little nugget, please leave a like, share the video with others that also might be grieving wherever you are, because it does affect the whole family. Even if it's not, if it's in a divorce situation, it might affect many other family members. And certainly with a estrangement, your spouse, your other children are grieving, aunts, uncles, cousins, they've lost a family member. And now somehow you end up having to pick up the pieces because, you've been in it longer. So now the aunt and everyone's leaning on you, putting extra pain and responsibility on someone who's already grieving. So get help and reach out to Karen. We'll put her information down below. And thank you so much for being here.
thank you, Tracy, for having me.